Eagle, this is Houston. We have a problem. Your oxygen scrubbers appear to be failing.
Roger that, Houston. Running diagnostic GPT now. Houston, I think we just hit a rate limit.
Say that again, Eagle.
Yeah, it says you've reached the usage cap. It wants us to try again in 12 hours.
12 hours. Eagle, this is life or death. We can't wait that long. Switching you to an open source model now.
Houston, I think that did it. We're back online. Oxygen is stable, nav is unlocked, and wait, I have full access?
That's what I'm talking about, Eagle. No restrictions, full control, no monthly fees.
Houston, I think open source AI just saved our lives.
Affirmative, Eagle. Now bring that lander home.
Welcome to Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast, where we explore the intersection of AI and creativity with your hosts, Rob and Jason.
Welcome back to Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Moore, here with my partner in AI, Rob Lauder. And behind the scenes, I want to give a shout out to our producer, Liz, who's keeping us on track in the background. Hey, Liz. We love you, Liz.
And she's literally working from her car right now. She's dedicated.
She is. But Rob, what's happening in your world right now?
A busy week for me. I just launched yesterday the next evolution of my AI collaborative, which is a training and development community for people to learn AI. So if you want free AI resources straight from my brain into your hands, check out roblauder.com/collaborative. You can find free resources, a community of folks that are like-minded like you. And if you are so inclined and really want to go deep, I'm doing masterclasses for paid users. You can also get access to my entire previous season of the AI Collaborative and learn all about all the different pieces of generative AI in depth. One of the benefits, Jason, is that behind the paywall is where I put all the stuff that I can't necessarily share publicly. So the things that are like, it would be irresponsible, like, automation and things like that, that I just don't want the entire, world to have. So I entice you with that. And then finally, we're going to do some Q&A for paid users and then also cohorts and affinity groups for things like creatives. So that's what I got going on. And I am really excited to see where it's going to go. How about you?
That is awesome. I got to be a part of the first AI collaborative and peek my head in quite often. And I always thought that what you were doing was well worth my time. And that's also where I met Liz, who was in your collaborative. I remember when we first started talking about this podcast, we immediately thought of her because she was such a superstar in the collaborative. You get to meet great people in this collaborative. So to our listeners, I definitely want to encourage you to sign up, be a part of that. In my world, I have been experimenting more with my Flux LoRa model on social media. Nothing mind-blowing, but I'm finding that when I prompt things and create custom images, it definitely stops the scroll. I was trapped in Tampa, Florida over the weekend because of some weather and had multiple missed flights. And I did a little caricature of me on a hotel bed complaining about being trapped. And I got as many comments on the image as I did my situation that was going on, which was just kind of funny. So everybody's paying attention to what's happening with AI these days. So creativity and AI paired together can definitely stop the scroll. But today we are picking up on the second part of our last episode. We're going to talk about open source models. Rob, you're going to kind of lead the way in this conversation. Let's get started.
Yeah. And so we looked at a lot of free commercial models last week. And man, I just thinking back to that episode, I just felt like every 2 seconds we were saying, and this is what you can't do with it. This is what you can't do with that. With open source, we're going to have just the opposite problem because there will be no limit to what you can do with it, which can be, on one hand, overwhelming, on another hand, distracting, but then also super, super powerful for working into your workflows. And so we're going to look at open source and open models. We're going to say, like, what is open source and what do we mean by that? We'll look at why it's important. Why in the world would you want to go down this route? If you are a tinkerer, this is going to be for you. But then also, if you are a layperson just exploring, this might be something to dive into as well. And then we'll look at all the different tools that are available. And so, let's get to it.
Let's get into it for sure. As we mentioned, we just did an episode on free commercial models. And today we're going to talk about open source, but some of our listeners might not know what open source is. Rob, how would you define open source?
I'm going to get a lot of flack for using this term because there's some purists out there who will say that's not open source. I'm using the term colloquially, and in some ways I'm using it technically as well. But open source just denotes software for which the original source code is made freely available and may be redistributed and modified by anyone. So basically anybody can do whatever they want with it, fork it, use it in any way they choose. And so I'm using the term a bit loosely here to include models and tools that have maybe some more restrictive licenses, but things that you can download, run them, build into your own products, etc., even though if they're not purist open source. So I might get a little hate mail on that, but that's why I'm giving that disclaimer on the front end.
So when the company that made ChatGPT came around, they called themselves OpenAI. I'm assuming that is not open source, right?
Well, those early models were, so things like Whisper and whatnot. But today, it's a bit of a misnomer. I think closed AI would be more appropriate.
So this open source solution, they're out there, they're everywhere. What does the landscape look like in this space? And what's out there? I mean, what are some of the models that you're using? What are the things that we're going to talk about today?
I am such a nerd in this space. I love this stuff so much. And so I might get a little on the edge of my seat as we go through this. But basically, any of the tools that we've talked about on our podcast, there is probably an equivalent to that available in the open source world. In fact, a lot of the tools and the models that you're using have their origins in open source. So before they ever hit the commercial world, they're available for open source users. We're going to look at two main areas where open source comes into play. First is in the models. And so the models are the actual, things that are trained, the AI piece that runs to create the thing, but then also the software that is built to run those models. And those are two separate components that if you're using like ChatGPT or Midjourney, it's all in one. But if you're using open source tools, you can pick a model, you can pick a user interface, you can stick them together and you can shuffle them up. So that's going to be fun to explore.
Outside of just being able to run them locally and the fact that you don't necessarily have to pay anything for them, why are open source models so important?
Yeah, so like you kind of alluded to with the OpenAI, closed AI piece, OpenAI, which is probably one of the biggest players, if not the biggest player in the AI space today, was started as a nonprofit. It still is technically a nonprofit. And Sam Altman, the director, is trying to take it for profit as we speak. Like all of this began with open source work. All of it began with as research. All of it began as computer scientists and data scientists and machine learning experts coming together to build stuff. And then on top of that, developers coming together to build stuff, to use the stuff that they build. And so most of the stuff that you're using today has its roots in open source projects. We mentioned Leonardo.ai in our last episode as a free tool that you can use to generate some images, but a lot of their technology is just repackaged open source stuff. So anything that they can do, you can do on your own with some of these models. Nearly all of them are going to be built on some sort of open source, so there's going to be an equivalent somewhere. Where you really get into the advantage of the closed source stuff, the commercial stuff, is in the model itself. So it's not necessarily the tools or the software. It's just they just build a really, really good model, and that's the competitive advantage. I find that a lot of the new features that you do get in these products, they've been pioneered, tested, refined, developed in the open source community 6 months or so prior. And so like you listen to news podcasts or YouTubers and they're like, hey, this new thing came out. It's so cool. I'm like, yeah, I've been playing with that for 6 months now because I use open source tools. So that's one of the advantages there.
It almost sounds like there's no downside.
We're going to get to some downsides.
I mean, it sounds so great when you describe it the way you describe it. Why would I want to run an open source model or software on my computer?
This is going to just make it sound even better because the benefits are way up there. All of these models, we're talking about things that you can download and run on your own hardware. I've got my laptop, I've got my desktop, I can download a chatbot, I can download an image model, and I can run it offline totally. One of the main benefits is just that offline access. You don't have to be connected to the internet all the time. What happens if ChatGPT goes down? You can't do your work for that day. If I'm using a local model, I can run it without any interruptions. That also helps with things like privacy concerns. And so I was just consulting with an organization that wanted to use LLMs with medical records, which like you don't want to send those over the air to OpenAI because that would be violating the law. But things like medical records, personal info, those weird interests that you ask ChatGPT about, all of that is stored locally and stays private. Also, there's an element of control. Really dial in those parameters and get the model to do what you want it to do in just the right way. That, if you're using a commercial model, you're at the whim of however the developers have decided to tune that. Another big benefit here is customization. And so with these models, you can fine tune them to work exactly how you want them to work. With an image model, you can fine tune an image model on your own image data set, things like we've been talking about with LoRa's and training in a model on our likeness. You can do that with LLMs too. So you can train an LLM on your own data. There's also kind of a whole suite of tools that some of them get built into commercial products, but some of them don't. Things like control nets, which we're going to cover in a future episode. You can check out my Medium article where I go into 4 image generation features that you might not know about, but you should. All of them are available in open source. And so you can use some really interesting tools that you might not get in other image generators. The third piece, in this customization section, is just being able to build like a custom pipeline to do specific tasks. And so when we're talking about using AI tools in enterprise level commercial use, a lot of times you need to build a pipeline to do a very specific thing and to make it work reliably. I worked with a client not too long ago where they were starting a generative VFX company to where, artists would render out an animation and then they could retexture that animation using some of these tools. Or same thing with a client that's doing architectural renderings. They want to get that base rendering, but renders look like renders. But then when we run them through a pipeline, we can have very high accuracy while retaining the overall structure, but making it look a lot better. So you can build those custom pipelines and do stuff that you just can't do with these other models. And the good news is it's actually kind of accessible and easy once you get used to it. I think the most compelling piece for me, Jason, is the early adoption. So you get access to the coolest toys before literally anyone else. Now that comes with a caveat that if you are not a tinkerer and you want things to work reliably 100% of the time and just get the stuff done, you're not going to have the support that you're going to have with the bigger commercial models. But if you are willing to tinker, beta test, break things, figure out how things work and find new applications for stuff, man, open source is the way to go. Not all of these open source tools are bleeding edge either. There's lots of stable, reliable options that you can just run locally and do what you want with. And then finally,
I think you have to have a really, really patient personality for this kind of stuff, right? You are willing to beat your head against the wall and figure it out and be frustrated, right?
Yeah. If you're on the early adopter side, so if you're a nerd like me and you want to try everything on day one, then absolutely, you're going to be banging your head against a wall a lot. But kind of like I mentioned, there's a lot of stable options out there too that are getting easier and easier to use as these tools develop. And so don't write this off if you're not a tinkerer because you're going to be able to play with all this stuff. The last benefit here to open source is the censorship piece. We talked about DeepSeek last week, and we talked about how you ask it certain questions about the Chinese government, and it's going to give you a non-answer and censor itself. Every single model that you use has some level of censorship. It will refuse some things, particularly the bigger the model, the more powerful the model, the more careful they need to be about safety and making sure that their responses are appropriate. Because if ChatGPT was cussing you out every time you used it, some people might like that, but it's going to turn off a large portion of their audience. Open models still have those protections and refusals there, but there are uncensored models that exist. And just remember, though, that with great power comes great responsibility. You can ask an uncensored model how to do all sorts of nefarious things, and it will tell you. So don't do that.
Well, Rob, we've gotten a pretty good start here on the conversation. Let's take a break and we'll come back and talk more about which models we ought to be using.
This episode is brought to you by the AI Collaborative. The AI Collaborative is 2 things. First, it's a community of AI enthusiasts and practitioners learning to apply generative AI together. Second, it's a space where I walk you through everything that I have learned about generative AI after thousands of hours of experimentation. So if you're interested in learning more about using generative AI for creativity, productivity, or personal growth, I hope you'll join me. A new round of applications is opening soon. Learn more at roblauder.com/collaborative.
And we're back, and we're going to talk a little bit now about which models we should use. There are a lot of different things we could choose from. Rob, what models should we pick, and how do we run them?
If you thought you had an overwhelming number of choices with the commercial models, you've got even more choices with the open source models, because not only do you get like a base model, like we'll talk about Llama here in a second as a language model, but then anybody that wants to, they can make a variant of that and kind of make it their own, and then somebody can make a variant of that. So we're going to try to help you tread water a little bit and point you in the direction of some of the more popular ones. So just listen, take notes, and then these might be some of the ones that you try first if you're going to go down this route. Like I said, basically any AI tool that you're using right now, there is an equivalent in the open source world because all of them came out of the open source world. First one category is text, or LLMs. So, we've got ChatGPT, we've got Claude. What can we do on the open source side that is in that space? Options here, again, are too many to list, but here are a few that you might want to check out. Meta is kind of famous for open sourcing their models and their code. And so they have a series of models called Llama, Llama, just like the animal. Many of the models that you will encounter are just fine tunes of this base model. They regularly update their models. They get more and more powerful and bigger as you go. But then also they make sure that they release variants that are smaller and that you can run on consumer hardware.
See, I thought that this was just a model that allowed me to talk to animals. So I thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, no, it actually lets you talk to a robot.
Oh, okay. No actual llamas involved.
It can pretend to be a llama if you want it to. That's the cool thing, man. Just system prompt it and it'll do anything you want it to.
That sounds like that would be helpful for no one, but thank you. Thank you for explaining that.
I think we're going to need to do a supplemental bit on that one, and we're just going to have an entire episode where it's translated to Llama Talk by ChatGPT.
There you go. How to talk to llamas. Go ahead.
All right, moving on. Before we get too silly, as Monty Python would say, Google has models called Gemma, so you can download those variants. Microsoft has a series of very capable models called Phi. And then finally, my favorite one, and this is the one I'm going to tell you to use unless you just really want to tinker, is from a company called Cohere. They've got models called Command R and Command R Plus that are very, very good, and also do things like tool use and other things like that. They are a understatement, I think, in the AI world, and part of that is because they're focusing on enterprise. But they make their models available for anybody to use as long as you can run them.
So you've given us 5 different options here, and you said there were more than just that on the list. I also happen to know from the non-open source world that every model seems to have its own sort of personality and they do different things and all that. How do you know which model to use? It seems like it can be pretty overwhelming with so many options to make the right choice. How do we choose? Which models do we load? All of those sorts of things.
Yeah, and to be fair, we're not talking about like installing a new app on your phone. Like downloading a model is a big deal. Particularly the more capable models. I mean, they're 30, 40 gigabytes of data. So it's not trivial to just install a new one. You can still install whatever you want to, but I've got a 2 terabyte hard drive on my MacBook Pro, and even that's going to get filled up in a hurry. You can actually try a lot of these out online. So because they're open source, you can find lots of places to run them. But if you're going to kind of like figure out where you want to start, what I would do is first look at the different capabilities and styles and restrictions. Some models can do, like ChatGPT has tool use and can use code interpreter or generate images. There's some models that can do that. There's also vision models out there, so they can look at an image and tell you what's in the image. For a starting point, I think that Llama 3.3 is a accessible choice. It's a great model. They're newest, and it would be a good place to start. Also, that Command R series from Cohere would be a good one to start with. There's a vision model. There's one called Lava, which is a vision model based on Llama and a popular choice. But it's important to note here that, and this is where we get to the but part of the episode, and that's going to be, here's the downside, is that you do need to have hardware that will run these things. The size of the model and the complexity and capability of the model that you can run really depends on your hardware. Apple Silicon, if you've got a M1, M2, M3, or M4 MacBook or Mac Studio or Mac Mini, you're at an advantage here because Apple Silicon really shines in the LLM space. My M4 Max has 128 gigs of memory and can run just about anything that's out there commercially, including Command R Plus, which is 104 billion parameters and a massive model that I couldn't run, for example, on my M1 with the 64 gigs of memory. So you're gonna, if you're running a potato from like the early '90s, that compact Presario, or the dude you're getting a Dell, box that has 300 megabyte hard drive and 4 gigs of RAM, probably not going to run these. You'll see numbers like 7B or 13B or 70B after a model, and these refer to the number of parameters in the model. Parameters just means capability, so the amount of connections that it can make between all the concepts, and the overall capability tends to go up as you have a larger model. If you have low-end hardware, you might run a 7B model. If you have high-end hardware, you might run a 70B model. You also see things called quants, which they'll look like Q_4, which are just making models smaller and more efficient at the expense of some precision and quality. So I don't think that the average user needs to go deep on those things, but I think that if you get into where you're going to start, maybe downloading some of these tools, you'll see all of that and you'll kind of freeze, because like, what do I do? That's just the language that you would be looking at there. The B's are parameters. Bigger is typically better, but also harder to run. And the quants, or the Qs, the larger the number, the more compressed the model is.
You only sounded like the teacher on Charlie Brown to me, Warner. Yes. But it's all very fascinating to me. I am running an M3 Max MacBook Pro, and I'll tell you, when I'm starting to feel a little cold, I will definitely fire up an AI model so that my fans start to hum and my lap is warm again.
Sounds like a jetliner taking off. It's just like that sound you get when you're about to take off on the runway. That's what you're going to get running an AI model.
Absolutely. And it's a little ironic that Macs have always been kind of the visual machines, the creative machines, and they run language really well, but they don't run image generation quite as well as non-Macs do. Let's talk a little bit about how to run these things. What do you need to actually run the models on your computer?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's a language model or an image model or what have you. Remember that the model and the software to run the model are separate, and that's a good thing, because you can update it to a new model and swap to a new model without updating all of your software, or you can try different softwares and use the same models. There are a gazillion options out there because it's the open source world and everybody wants to take their stab at it. But I'm going to focus your attention on two. The first one, if you are a ChatGPT user, you'll see you'll be right at home here, and it's called OpenWebUI. It gives you a ChatGPT style interface, and it's basically a full-featured, very self-contained UI to run these models. It handles the downloads for you, so it downloads the models in the back end. You don't need to worry about any fancy setup. But if you're a pro user, it's got all of the advanced features that you would expect out of something like ChatGPT, like tool use and function calling. You can just install a plugin like you would on your phone installing a new app. And then I've got it hooked up to my image generation UI, and I can generate right there, and like I would with ChatGPT. And then also with OpenWebUI, you can use commercial APIs in a local interface if you want to as well. So you're not bound to that $20 a month plus plan with OpenAI, for example. You can just use the API credits, which tend to be if you're going to use $20 in API credits, you're going to be using it a whole lot. So this will be even for folks who want to tinker with OpenAI's models, but don't want to pay for that subscription. The other one, and OpenWebUI actually uses this one for its backend, is called Ollama. Llamas are popular in the AI world, but it's Ollama, all one word. Now, if you go to roblauder.medium.com, you'll find a guide on how to set this up. It's the back end to what makes a lot of these front ends work, and it's the piece that actually runs the model. If you just download that, if you're like a nerd and you want to look like Neo from the Matrix, and then you can chat with the chatbot in your terminal. But yeah, this basically, as long as you have a web UI and a model, you're good to go.
I want to look like Neo, but I can't even pretend to be that cool. I do have one quick little follow-up, and I don't know that all of our listeners would know what an API is. Can you say anything really quick about what an API is?
Yeah. So basically, if I go to chatgpt.com, I'm interacting with the GPT service. An API is basically just a way to access those services from other services. OpenAI has a series of APIs that you can use their tools in other apps. And so you can download Open Web UI, for example, and make a little connection directly to OpenAI, use their models without using the product itself.
That is a helpful description. Well, let's talk about one of my favorite ways to use AI, image generation. I like LLMs, but where I probably spend more of my time is in image generation, video generation, all that kind of thing. Tell us about the open source image options. What can we do there?
Yeah, so I think this is really one of the more developed areas in the open source world. Like the creative tools that are available in open source in image generation, it's what sold me on open source and running local models, because all of these commercial tools are going to end up with some of these pieces. But if I'm an artist and I really want to create the thing that I have in my mind, I can use these open source tools in conjunction with each other to do a lot more than I could with any one of these commercial models. And so we're going to talk about models. We'll talk about some of those tools. The first open source model to burst onto the scene back in 2022 was Stable Diffusion 1.5. Since then, they've released newer and newer models of the Stable Diffusion line, like Stable Diffusion XL and most recently SD 3.5. But it's basically just a family of image generation models that have really been the base for a lot of the stuff that you're going to be using now. You can see some of my workflows for using these on my GitHub. So we'll link to that in the show notes. But more recently, I guess probably 6 months now, Flux came out, and it's a new type of image model. These are not open source, but they are free to use for the most part. They've got different levels, which kind of just like the LLMs have different levels of capability and accuracy and quality. These different levels will kind of just tune them to the use case. The big one is Flux Pro. That's the one that you can only get online through a service. But there's two more that you can download and run, one of which is open source and one of which is not open source but free to use. The more capable one is called Flux Dev. It's not open source, so you can't use it commercially. But and when I say commercially, I don't mean like, hey, I'm going to make a t-shirt and put it on Amazon. I mean like create a service where you're offering this thing as a service in competition to Black Forest Labs. And then the other one is Flux Schnell, which is a distilled version. It's basically a more condensed version, and that's released with an Apache license, which means that you can do literally whatever you like with it. And you could make a competing image model service if you wanted to. There's a bunch of others out there. Like, again, you could go so deep on the rabbit trail. You've got PixArt. There's some experimental models out there. There are so many cool research-only models that never see the light of day because they're only for research and they've got non-commercial licenses. One is called CosXL Edit. It's based on SDXL, but it's a instruct model. So what I can do is I can type, like, give it my headshot and say, make it Pixar, and it makes it Pixar. Or give it a landscape and say, make it a ukiyo-e painting, and it makes it in that style. Like, I feel like those sorts of things are things that like folks would kill to have in some of these models, and they expect the models that are available commercially to do that thing, but really it's just not there.
That is cold fusion for me. It's like when we get the AI that will allow us to treat an image just by telling it what we want to do to it. Midjourney will sort of retexture an image, but it doesn't quite do that. Let's make that one happen for real.
I am not that technical, so I can't help with that. But what I can do is help with fine tunes. One of the other advantages of running image models locally is that any user can make a fine tune of that model. And so basically a fine tune, you start with the base model, which is like the model that the developers train, and say, here you go use this. And then you can continue training it on your own image data set, either by creating a LoRa, which can be a character. I can teach a model to recognize me or Jason or an animated character. It could be a style. And so that could be like if I had a bunch of paintings in my own style, I could train a model to reproduce that style. Or it can be a concept that's not already in the model. There's a really robust community around people that are making those things. I've fine-tuned some of my own models. You can find them on Civit AI. And we also need to leave a disclaimer anytime we mention Civit AI that if you go there, use civitai.green rather than civitai.com, because it is the internet and there's all sorts of lewd and scandalous things on civitai.com.
I learned this recently at a training for church people where I went to the regular Civit and accidentally clicked on the wrong thing. And well, it was not safe for work, let's just say. So definitely go to the green version. Rob, how do we know which one of these things to choose? Because you've given us a bunch of different models and ways to interact. Which one do you go for?
Some of the same principles with LLMs apply here. Basically, style of which one do you like the best. As a base model, Flux has a very distinct style. If you're going to generate images of humans, they all have the Flux chin. Kind of looks like a little dimple in every single human that's on there. They're kind of like hyper realistic, not quite looking like a human. Whereas I find Stable Diffusion tends to be a little bit more on the realistic side. But Flux, for example, doesn't have a lot of artistic styles trained into it because it is a very opinionated model, whereas Stable Diffusion models tend to have a broader stylistic range. But then you want to look at, can I actually run this model? And so Flux, for example, is a very large model. I can run it just fine on my desktop PC that has a RTX 3080 GPU, 10 gigs of VRAM, which is not a lot in the AI world. But if you have a lower end PC, you might not be able to run all of the things. And then there's the trainability. Can people fine tune this model? Because a lot of the innovation is going to be driven by folks who want to fine tune the models to build the tools around the models. And so how flexible that model is in the training process and the inference process will determine kind of which ones go. If it were me and I were starting with one, I would start with something in the SDXL family of models. It's not the newest, but it's the most mature. And also the Stable Diffusion 3.5 and the Flux models tend to be a lot heavier models. And so they're harder to run, take more resources to run. So that's where I'd start. Start with an SDXL model. And by the way, hit the show notes or go to my profile on Civet AI and you'll find some, I mean, I'm biased, but I think they're very, very good fine tunes for photographic styles.
I have downloaded and used them. You got me started on, way back in Automatic 1111 with Stable Diffusion. And I think I downloaded your tweaked models and they're definitely worth downloading. And go follow the links, friends. You will enjoy using Rob's fine tunes. All right. So you've given us an idea for how we choose which model to use. How do we actually run these things on our computers? Do we have to know some sort of coding language, or is there, what do we use? Is there an interface? How do we do this?
Yep, you can run it from the command line with code, but you don't have to, and I don't either. So you might want to check out another one of my Medium articles on how to get started with local image generation. Find it at roblauder.medium.com. First thing you need to be aware of is those hardware constraints. Whereas Macs are really, really good at running LLMs because they have massive amounts of unified memory. These models aren't optimized for Apple Silicon. They're optimized for a specific type of GPU, which is NVIDIA GPUs and CUDA. And so they run way, way faster on PCs than they do on Macs. So be aware of that. But you can still run these on Macs. You just need to wait a while.
I have a local copy of Flux that I run fairly regularly, although one image on the dev will take 10 minutes. So it just really messes with your workflow a little bit. I would rather go run it on a website and be able to just get some outputs really quick and iterate and that kind of thing. When I first started working with you, you helped me get a couple things going where I had to use Terminal to load Python and some other things on my system. And I'm a very right-brained guy. So loading all of that stuff and the dependencies and setting up all the right directories and all that was a little challenging for my right brain. I do want to let our listeners know there is a tool out there called Pinocchio that you can download. It's on Mac or PC, and it'll kind of create all the structure for you. And you basically run it as a wrapper for all the stuff that's out there.
You mentioned the setup process. When we first got into it, it was like everything was, you had to go to your terminal, you had to type arcane commands into it and cast magical spells and hope that it would work and that fortune would smile upon you and it would actually run. But more and more, these open source platforms are maturing. One that is my favorite, and I've desperately tried to turn you onto, but you keep refusing my pressure, is Comfy UI. Comfy UI is like mad scientist mode. If you've used DaVinci Resolve and you're familiar with its node-based interface for color grading, or if you've used Blender for 3D and you're familiar with how nodes work, this is another node-based platform, but basically you can just build out an entire pipeline by connecting the dots between different modules. And with that, you can make it do anything you want to. Comfy gets day one support for most of these models because it's so extensible. and it's always getting new features, but it's got a really high learning curve. So if you want to like, mid-journey type prompt get thing, Comfy UI is going to be more of a serious professional tool for dedicated artists.
It is absolutely false advertising in the name, though. It is not comfy. It makes me very uncomfy. I remember you tried to show it to me over Zoom one time, and I was like, I think my eyes started to cross and I started to sweat a little bit just watching. It was so confusing to me. And then you actually came to my house.
That's how desperate I was to get you to use Comfy UI. I came to your house to try to get you to set it up.
And in my studio, we projected your screen onto a whiteboard. And even then, I'm like, oh man, I feel so uncomfortable right now. I love that you love it and I want to love it, but my eyes just cross and I'm confused.
Well, that's why you need folks like me to do all that fun stuff for you. And then I give you a workflow that you can run.
Yeah.
And so if you check out my GitHub, which will be linked here, I've got some Comfy UI workflows that if you want to get started with those.
When I first started using Flux, you gave me two different workflows, one that I could give it an image and then one that I could use a Lara with. And so I've played with it, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I just do what Rob set up for me.
Yep. And I will say that it's gotten a lot better too. There's new features that make it a little bit easier to browse, but you still need to know how to connect all those noodles and spaghetti and make it work together. But there's another one that I'm a fan of, particularly for folks who just want like an app-like experience, and it's called Invoke. Invoke is, they've got like a one-click installer. I can install on your Mac or your PC. It downloads all the models for you, and it's really easy to set up and maintain. But then the cool thing is that it's got some of the advanced features that you would get in a more complicated UI, like things like inpainting. So like inpainting is the process of you generate an image. I don't like this piece, or I want to add something there. I'm going to mark over it and I'm going to give it a new prompt and it's going to regenerate that piece of the image. So check out Invoke UI. And then if you are a Mac user, there are some Mac optimized models out there. They're still not going to run as fast as they do on a PC, but there's an app called Draw Things, DRAW, like Draw Things, which is free. It's a little clunky on the UI side, but it's about as simple as you're going to get on the Mac. You can download it, install it, and do some of these image tasks with it as well, without having to worry about the command line and dependencies and all that other jazz.
So there's a lot you can do now with images. We talked about LLMs. I think we've both said on numerous occasions, we feel like 2025 is the year of AI video. Can we do AI video in an open sourced way that is as good as some of the other tools that we've talked about in other episodes?
That sounds like a leading question if I've ever heard one. And the answer is yes, you can do that in an open source way. This is a space that's exploded in the past 2 months. So this is very new, whereas image generation is very well established at this point, and LLMs are very well established at this point. Local video models are not. And so if you go back to our AI filmmaking episode, I've alluded to some of these models in the past, but before kind of like the current generation of video models, you had to like hack image models in order to produce video. And so there's some ways to like, kind of get frames out of an image model. I remember I did one of my early projects was I took video frames and then used an image to image approach to regenerate each frame like I wanted it to. And it's like this crazy, like trippy, make your eyes cross piece because there's no consistency in it. But that's what we were stuck with. And today, you kids don't know how good you have it because there are very, very good open source video models. Because it's a less developed area, though, it's going to be harder to get started. It's an area where I'm excited to watch it grow over the next year or so. FAL, I don't know, FAL, I don't even know how to pronounce it. But they're an AI company. They host all sorts of different open source models. You can run them through their service without having to worry about hardware and stuff. They just announced in the past week or so that they just raised $49 million to power the future of AI video. So it's coming. And if you want to tinker, we can do some open source stuff right now.
Yeah, let's talk about what the options are. I know I've gotten to play with one of these that was pretty cool, but tell us what's out there and available to us.
Yeah, there are several options. Most of them are not worth mentioning. So I'm going to mention two that are interesting enough to explore. One is called Hunyuan, and it burst on the scene a month or two ago, but it has been a significant advance in the world of AI video. It's Hunyuan, Hunyuan. The Hunyuan model is very easy to train, number one, but it also takes a ton of VRAM. So like I can technically run it on my box with a 10 gigabyte VRAM graphics card, but that's because I'm offloading it to my system RAM. It's really slow. That's just a technical, nerdy way to say that you got to have a beefy computer if you're going to run that. But this is the one that you've played with, and you've got to experience the customization
Yeah.
and extensibility of Honeywell.
Yeah, and since my computer it completely chokes on these kinds of things, I did run it over on FAL or however you say it. And the thing is it's pretty inexpensive. I think I loaded up $100 in credit and I played with it for 2 or 3 days, and I think I spent $20 and probably generated 20 or 30 videos or something like that. But anyway, what I really love about this particular model is that you can also combine LARAs with it. So again, you did this for me, but created a LARA with my likeness. So I could go and text prompt in my name to Onion and could make myself into a Jedi or Superman or whatever. And it's really, really coherent video. I can't wait till it's longer than 5 seconds, but definitely a model that is worth playing with.
Yeah. And then really underscoring the power and benefits of open source. Literally this morning or last night, a new model that is a fine tune of Honeywell called Skyreels dropped, and it adds some new functionality, and it's boasting, at least from the clips that I've seen so far, that is higher quality than many commercial models out there. So that's something to keep an eye on. And again, because it's got a robust community behind it, you can see development like this very quickly in these areas. And then that pushes the commercial models to get even better as well. If you want to check out Skyreels, you can go to fal.ai and it has it available for inference.
We may have to just pause this episode for a minute so I can go play right now.
You can hold off. We got a little bit more to go. And then
okay. All right.
All right. One more to talk about. It's not nearly as exciting, but it's interesting enough. It's called LTX video. It's very fast. It doesn't take a whole lot of system memory. And so it is more accessible to run, but it's also less capable. Great little tool to tinker with. But at this point, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time with it unless you're curious.
All right. So then if we're in production, how do we choose which of these two models we should use?
So go back to our filmmaking episode and kind of walk through some of the features that are in video models. If you can, try to run Honeywell. And if you can't, you can either run that in the cloud or play with LTX. Video models as a whole aren't very accessible right now. So this is one of those areas that it's like, all right, if you want to tinker, go for it. If you don't, stick with some of the commercial models.
All right, that's great information. How do we actually run this then?
Yeah, so just like everything else, you need to have a model, you need to have a UI. Remember, though, that if you're exploring this space, consumer hardware is going to be limiting. You may not be able to run it on your computer. That's okay. There's other options. You brought up how your Mac chokes on video. Most video models can't even run on Macs, and that's because they're optimized for CUDA, which is a PC thing. A lot of the video tools you're not even going to have access to if you are running a Mac, but if you have a PC, you might have a chance there. A lot of them have, at this point, just code to run it. And so if you're not a nerd, it's going to be hard. But that's definitely outside of the scope of what the average person I would expect them to do. If you use the tool that I mentioned earlier, Comfy UI, a lot of these models are being rolled into Comfy UI, so you can generate images and video in there. But then at the end of the day, I'm a huge fan of FAL and services like it. There's another one called Replicate. Hugging Face is a place that hosts models, but then also offers hardware in the cloud that you can just, kind of run these models from a UI online. So it's not like you're getting a fully featured app like you would for Kling or something else, but you're able to run the models without having to download all that stuff to your computer. And then you can also do some of the things like training LoRa's, like we talked about with your likeness, on FAL as well. So hard to run on your own hardware, but just be aware that there are options. And if you want to tinker, you can. Otherwise, just wait a few months and it's going to be a lot more mature and you're going to be able to do all sorts of fun stuff that we can't even think about right now.
Yes, we always say in 6 months, you'll be able to do all the things you hope to do today. Well, Rob, that was an incredible rundown on open source. I am so glad that I have you as a sort of guide through this particular territory. And I've been able to use some of these resources, but I'm so glad that our listeners had that in-depth conversation about what is available. What would someone do if they want to really implement these ideas? What's the next step for them?
Yeah, so you know me, if you listen to me nerd out on this stuff, it's like drinking from a fire hose. But here's the thing. I don't expect you to catch all of it and guzzle it all down. I want you to catch a drop, and I want you to get like one little bit that, I can show you all the things that it can do. I want you to figure out the one thing that it will do for you. And so check out roblauder.medium.com. Get all of my guides and articles on how to do these things. It's Medium. It's free. I'm not trying to sell you anything there. But then also, if you were to just pick one model and try it, pick one that interests you, maybe pick something that does something similar to one that you're already doing. So if you're using ChatGPT, for example, and you want to try an LLM, get that Open Web UI and give it a try. If you are using Midjourney or something like that, go grab an image model and give it a try and just like get the bug. Because here's the thing. Once you get the bug, you're going to go down the rabbit hole and you're going to be right where I want you. And that is experimenting and trying all the fun stuff. So get started, pick one and start somewhere.
Well, that's it for this episode of Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast. Join us next week for another incredible episode. Thanks for tuning in to Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, it would mean a lot to us if you'd smash that subscribe button, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. If you'd like to connect with us or follow along on the projects we're working on, find us on Instagram at AI Creative Podcast or AICreativePodcast.com.